Blood dripped from the shattered crystal chandelier, pooling on the imported Italian marble below. Ingrid thought she was so clever, leaning in to whisper a cruel, dismissive joke about my weight to the most dangerous man in Chicago. She did not know Stefano Esposito was already entirely obsessed with me, or that he loved watching the world burn. The annual winter gala at the Drake Hotel was a glittering snake pit, a place where Chicago's elite mingled with the monsters who actually ran the city. The gold-leafed ceilings and heavy velvet drapes absorbed the sounds of clinking champagne flutes and hollow laughter. I stood near the edge of the grand ballroom, nursing a club soda and watching the room with the practiced detachment of a ghost. My name is Noemi Russo, and to the glittering socialites swirling around me in their size 0 designer gowns, I was completely invisible. That was exactly how I preferred it. I am a woman, built with soft curves and heavy thighs, taking up space in a world that constantly demands women shrink themselves. For years, that reality was a weapon used against me by the person who was supposed to love me most. But tonight, my physical form was merely a comfortable disguise. Beneath the emerald green silk of my dress, my mind was running complex algorithms. I was the premier forensic accountant for the Midwestern underworld. I cleaned money so dirty it practically bled, funneling millions through offshore shell companies with a few keystrokes. I was untouchable in my element. But my element was the shadows. Then I saw her, Ingrid Lombardi. Ingrid was my ex-girlfriend, a statuesque blonde with a heart made of dry ice and a relentless ambition to climb the social ladder of the Chicago syndicates. We had broken up 2 years ago, but the emotional scars she left behind still throbbed on cold nights. She had drained my bank accounts to fund her boutique art gallery and spent our entire relationship feeding on my insecurities, constantly reminding me that I was lucky to have someone as beautiful as her settling for someone as fat as me. Tonight, she was hunting for a new patron. The temperature in the ballroom seemed to drop 10 degrees. The string quartet missed a note. The screech of the cello cutting through the low murmur of the crowd. Stefano Esposito had arrived. As the undisputed head of the Esposito syndicate, Stefano was a force of nature wrapped in a charcoal bespoke suit. He was 29, ruthlessly intelligent, and viciously territorial. 6 months ago, he had purged the old guard of the Chicago outfit in a single bloody night known on the streets as the Red Sunday. He had high cheekbones, a sharp jawline, and eyes the color of a stormy sea. His mere presence demanded absolute submission. Men stepped out of his path with their heads bowed. Women watched him with a dangerous mixture of terror and desire. I kept my eyes locked on the ice cubes in my glass. I had laundered $8 million for the Esposito family just last week, burying it so deep in real estate portfolios that the FBI would need a time machine to find it. But I had never met the boss in person. I was just a routing number and an encrypted email address to him. Or so I thought. Ingrid, smelling power like blood in the water, adjusted her plunging neckline and intercepted Stefano near the ice sculpture. I watched from the perimeter as she flashed her brilliant, predatory smile. She spoke to him, her hand casually brushing his forearm. Stefano stood completely rigid, his face an unreadable mask of cold marble. Then Ingrid made the biggest mistake of her life. Her eyes darted across the room and landed on me. A familiar, cruel smirk twisted her painted lips. I knew that look. It was the look she gave when she was about to tear me down to elevate herself. Ingrid leaned into Stefano, closing the distance between them to whisper in his ear. Even from 30 feet away, I could read her lips. I saw the way her mouth formed the words. She was calling me a fat cow, telling him that I was a pathetic, disgusting creature who didn't belong in a room full of beautiful people. She thought she was building camaraderie with a ruthless mafia boss by sharing a moment of casual cruelty. Stefano did not laugh. He did not smile. He turned his head slowly, his dark eyes locking onto Ingrid with a terrifying emptiness. Then his gaze shifted across the crowded room, slicing through the hundreds of bodies between us, and landed directly on me. My breath caught in my throat. The sheer intensity of his stare was paralyzing. It was not a look of disgust or pity. It was a look of raw, consuming possession. He looked at me the way a starving man looks at a feast, the way a dragon looks at a mountain of gold. Stefano leaned back toward Ingrid. He spoke quietly, his voice carrying just enough for the surrounding mobsters to hear. I couldn't hear the words, but I saw the color completely drain from Ingrid's face. She stumbled backward, her mouth opening and closing in silent horror. Without another glance at my ex, Stefano Esposito began walking toward me. The crowd parted for him like the Red Sea. My pulse hammered against my ribs, a frantic rhythm of adrenaline and fear. I braced myself, tightening my grip on my glass, ready to defend myself, ready to run. But as he stopped mere inches from me, the brutal coldness in his eyes melted away, replaced by a dark, burning heat that made my knees weak. Stefano stood over me, his broad shoulders blocking out the rest of the glittering ballroom. The scent of him invaded my senses, a heady mixture of sandalwood, expensive tobacco, and the ozone scent of incoming violence. He reached out, his large, calloused hand gently tracing the curve of my waist, where the emerald silk draped over my hip. The touch was electric, sending a jolt of heat straight to my core. "You look breathtaking, Noemi," he said, his voice a deep, gravelly rasp that vibrated in my chest. I stared up at him, my mind struggling to process the impossible reality. "You know who I am?" He stepped closer, eliminating the remaining space between us. I felt the hard lines of his chest brush against me. "I know everything about you, Mia Regina. I know that you moved $8 million for me in under 3 minutes last Tuesday. I know that you drink your coffee black, that you work until 3 in the morning, and that you are the most brilliant, beautiful woman in this godforsaken city." My breath hitched. "But Ingrid, she just told you." Stefano's jaw clenched, a muscle feathering near his ear. His eyes darkened with a violent promise. "Ingrid Lombardi is a dead woman walking. She dared to speak filth about what is mine. She thought she could look at a goddess and see dirt. I am going to teach her exactly what happens when you disrespect the queen of the Esposito Syndicate." He did not ask for permission. Stefano took my hand, lacing his fingers through mine, and led me out of the ballroom. Every eye in the Drake Hotel was fixed on us. I walked beside the most feared man in the Midwest, my curves on full display, feeling a strange, intoxicating surge of power. I was not hiding in the shadows anymore. I was walking in the spotlight, completely shielded by a monster who looked at me like I was his religion. We descended to the underground parking garage, where a fleet of black-armored SUVs was waiting. His men, hardened killers in dark coats, instantly stood at attention. A scarred man named Matteo opened the door for us, his eyes respectfully averted from my face. Inside the luxurious cabin of the vehicle, the city lights blurred past the tinted windows. Stefano poured 2 glasses of scotch from a crystal decanter and handed me one. Our fingers brushed, and the heat was undeniable. "What did you say to her?" I asked softly, taking a sip of the burning liquid. Stefano leaned back against the leather seat, his eyes never leaving my body. He studied the fullness of my thighs, the soft curve of my stomach, the swell of my breasts, with unmasked reverence. I told her that she had exactly 24 hours to pack her miserable life into a suitcase and leave Chicago. And I told her that if she ever looked at you again, I would cut out her eyes and feed them to the stray dogs in the South Side. A shiver ran down my spine, a confusing mix of terror and deep, primal arousal. You are going to start a war over a whispered insult? I am going to burn her world to ash because she hurt you, Noemi. Stefano reached out, his knuckles brushing against my cheek. I have been watching you for months. At first, it was just business. I needed to ensure the architect of my financial empire was secure. But then I saw you. I saw the way you carry yourself. The quiet strength, the brilliant mind trapped in a city of fools. I became obsessed. You are mine, Noemi. And nobody insults what is mine and lives to tell the tale. The fallout was immediate and catastrophic. By noon the next day, Ingrid Lombardi's life was systematically dismantled. I sat in Stefano's towering penthouse overlooking Lake Michigan, wrapped in a plush robe, a laptop resting on my thighs. Stefano was at the massive mahogany dining table, conducting a war meeting with Matteo and 2 other capos. He had insisted I stay with him, locking me away in a fortress of glass and steel where no one could touch me. The news reports playing silently on the massive television screens told the story. Ingrid's boutique art gallery in the Gold Coast had mysteriously gone up in flames overnight. A total loss. The insurance companies, heavily influenced by Esposito money, immediately flagged the incident for fraud, freezing any potential payouts. Her bank accounts, the ones she had so proudly flaunted after draining my own, were suddenly emptied. The funds routed through 30 different international servers before vanishing into the ether. I knew exactly how that was done, because I had done it myself before breakfast, drinking Stefano's expensive espresso. Stefano dismissed his men and walked over to the velvet sofa where I was sitting. He looked at the laptop screen, seeing the zeros in Ingrid's offshore accounts, and a slow, wicked smile spread across his face. "You are ruthless," he murmured, leaning down to press a hot, lingering kiss to the side of my neck. "She took my dignity for 2 years," I replied, my voice steady, though my pulse raced at his touch. "I just took her safety net. It seems fair." Stefano chuckled, a dark, rich sound. "You are perfect. But she is not going to run. She is too stupid for that." He was right. Ingrid was a cornered rat, and rats always bite. Desperate, penniless, and publicly humiliated, she didn't pack her bags and leave Chicago. Instead, she crossed the invisible boundary lines of the city and went straight to the South Side. She went to the Falcone family. The Falcones were the last remaining rivals to the Esposito Syndicate, a brutal, old-school mafia faction that dealt in human trafficking and narcotics. They hated Stefano for taking over the city, and they were looking for any weakness to exploit. Ingrid, having lived with me for 2 years, knew just enough about my nocturnal habits and encrypted drives to be dangerous. She sold them a story. She told Lorenzo Falcone that I was the key to bankrupting Stefano Esposito, that if they captured me, they could cripple the entire Esposito empire. The war had officially begun, and the prize was my life. The atmosphere in the penthouse shifted from a sanctuary of glass and silk into a heavily fortified war room. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, the Chicago skyline glittered with ignorant peace, completely unaware of the bloodbath brewing in the shadows. Lorenzo Falcone was a brute, a man who solved complex problems with baseball bats and gasoline. But with Ingrid in his ear, he suddenly had a map to the most vital arteries of the Esposito Empire. Ingrid knew I kept an offline, biometric physical server at a secure data center in the West Loop. It was a fail-safe, a digital vault containing the routing numbers for Stefano's ghost accounts, the deeds to his front businesses, and the blackmail files he used to keep the city's politicians on short leashes. If the Falcones breached that server, they could dismantle Stefano in a matter of days. Stefano stood by the window, his broad back tense under his tailored shirt. He had just gotten off the phone with his underboss. The Falcones were mobilizing. They had hit 2 of our supply warehouses in the south side, a distraction to draw his soldiers away from the city center. "They are looking for an opening," Stefano said, his voice a low rumble that resonated in the quiet room. "Lorenzo thinks I will leave the West Loop vulnerable to protect my territory. He thinks I am playing his game." I sat at the massive dining table, my fingers flying across my laptop keyboard. Lines of code and banking manifests reflected in my glasses. "I am not going to let them touch your assets, Stefano. I can initiate a remote wipe of the West Loop servers, but to do it cleanly without triggering a fail-deadly protocol that would erase our own backups, I have to be on the local network. I have to go there." Stefano turned sharply, his eyes flashing with immediate violent rejection. "Absolutely not. You are staying here, behind bulletproof glass and 20 armed guards. I will send Matteo to smash the servers with a sledgehammer if I have to." I closed my laptop and stood up, smoothing the fabric of the dark trousers I had changed into. The movement drew his gaze, his eyes tracking the heavy curve of my hips with that familiar, consuming heat. I walked over to him, placing my hands gently on his chest. "Matteo cannot bypass the biometric locks," I explained, keeping my voice steady. "And a physical destruction of the drives triggers an alert to the feds. I designed the system to look like a hardware failure, but I have to execute the command on site. Besides, we can use this. We can use me as bait." Stefano's hands gripped my waist, his fingers digging into my soft flesh with a possessive urgency. "I do not use what is mine as bait, Noemi. If a single bullet comes anywhere near you, I will burn this entire city to the ground." "You will not have to," I promised, looking up into his stormy eyes. "Let them think they have outsmarted us. Let Ingrid bring Lorenzo to the data center. You will be waiting. And while they are busy trying to take your empire, I will be inside, draining every single account the Falcone family has ever hidden. I will not just protect your money, Stefano. I will take theirs." A slow, dark smirk spread across Stefano's face. The sheer danger of the plan appealed to the monster inside him, but the brilliance of it appealed to the king. He pulled me flush against his hard body, kissing me with a bruising, desperate intensity that left me breathless. We moved out an hour later. The West Loop data center was a nondescript brutalist concrete building that looked like a telephone exchange. Inside, it was a humming labyrinth of server racks and cooling fans. I sat in the glass-walled control room on the 4th floor, plugging my terminal into the mainframe. Matteo and a dozen of Stefano's most lethal enforcers were positioned in the shadows of the server aisles. Stefano himself was waiting in the loading bay. The trap was set. Now we just needed the rats to take the cheese. It happened just after midnight. The heavy steel doors of the loading bay were breached with a localized explosive charge that shook the concrete floor beneath my feet. On the security monitors, I watched as 20 heavily armed Falcone soldiers flooded into the building. Leading them was Lorenzo Falcone, a massive man with a scarred face, and right beside him, completely out of her depth but arrogant as ever, was Ingrid. She was wearing a sleek tactical jacket over designer clothes, pointing directions out to Lorenzo as if she were commanding an army. She really thought she was the mastermind. She thought because she had made me feel small for 2 years, she was inherently smarter, inherently better. I turned back to my screen. My hands did not shake. I was in my element. I bypassed the Falcone network security using the back doors I had identified months ago. Within 3 minutes, I had located their offshore holdings. Within 5, I had initiated the transfers. Millions of dollars of dirty Falcone money began pouring into untraceable Esposito shell companies. Downstairs, the firefight erupted. The sound of automatic gunfire echoed up the ventilation shafts, a deafening, terrifying roar. I watched the monitors as Stefano and his men ambushed the Falcones. It was not a battle. It was a slaughter. Stefano moved through the chaos like the Grim Reaper, his weapon firing with cold, mechanical precision. He was a terrifying force of nature, relentlessly pushing forward, cutting off their escape routes. Lorenzo realized too late that he had walked into a meat grinder. He grabbed Ingrid by the arm, using her as a human shield as he retreated toward the stairwell that led up to my control room. He thought he could salvage the night by taking me hostage. Matteo's voice crackled over the radio on my desk. "Boss, Lorenzo is heading up the east stairs. He has the blonde with him. Let him go," Stefano's voice replied, chillingly calm. "Secure the ground floor. Leave Lorenzo to me." I heard the heavy, desperate footsteps echoing on the metal-grated stairs outside my control room. I finished the final transfer, hitting the enter key. The Falcone Empire was officially bankrupt. I locked the system and stood up just as the glass door of the control room was shattered by a bullet. Lorenzo kicked the door frame in, his gun leveled at my chest. Ingrid stumbled in behind him, looking absolutely terrified, her pristine appearance ruined by dust and the reality of the violence she had courted. When she saw me standing there, completely calm, a flash of the old, cruel Ingrid returned. "Look at you," she sneered, her voice trembling but dripping with venom. "Still hiding behind computers. Tell your men to stand down, Noemi, or Lorenzo is going to put a bullet in your fat head." I looked at my ex-girlfriend, truly seeing her for the first time. She was not a monster. She was just a pathetic, hollow shell of a woman who fed on the insecurities of others to feel full. "He is not going to do anything, Ingrid," I said calmly, "because he is already a dead man. And you are broke. I just drained the Falcone accounts, all of them. Lorenzo has nothing left to pay the men waiting outside, and nothing left to pay you." Lorenzo roared in fury, raising his weapon, but a shadow detached itself from the darkness of the hallway. Stefano stepped into the ruined doorway. His suit was ruined, splashed with the blood of his enemies, and his eyes were completely devoid of humanity. He raised his weapon and fired a single shot. Lorenzo Falcone's knee exploded. The massive man collapsed to the floor, screaming in agony, dropping his gun. Silence descended on the control room, broken only by Lorenzo's wet, gurgling moans and the humming of the servers. Stefano stepped over the bleeding Mafia Boss, not even sparing him a second glance. His eyes were locked on me, quickly scanning my body for any sign of injury. "Are you hurt, Mea Regina?" Stefano asked, his voice unexpectedly gentle despite the carnage around him. I shook my head, my heart swelling with a strange, dark affection for this brutal man. "I am perfect. The accounts are drained. The Falcones are finished." Stefano smiled, a genuine, beautiful smile that transformed his harsh features. "You are a masterpiece, Noemi." Ingrid was backed against the glass wall, her chest heaving in absolute panic. She looked between Lorenzo bleeding on the floor and Stefano, looking at me with pure worship, and her mind finally shattered. "Stefano," she pleaded, her voice cracking. "Stefano, please. I was just trying to survive. She tricked me. Noemi is manipulative. She is—" Stefano's head snapped toward her, the gentle warmth in his eyes vanishing instantly. He closed the distance between them in 2 long strides, his presence so overwhelming that Ingrid shrank down to the floor, cowering at his feet. "I told you what would happen if you ever spoke her name again," Stefano said softly. "I told you I would burn your world to ash." "Stefano, please. I am sorry. I will do anything. I will work for you. I am beautiful. I can be useful." Ingrid sobbed, completely discarding any shred of dignity she had left. Stefano looked down at her with absolute disgust. "You are nothing. You look at Noemi, and you see a woman who doesn't fit your narrow, pathetic definition of beauty. But I look at her, and I see a queen. I see a woman whose mind is a weapon, whose resilience is unbreakable, and whose curves are a privilege to worship. You called her fat. You thought that was an insult. You thought it would make me look away." He pulled a silver Zippo lighter from his pocket, flipping it open with a sharp clink. The small flame illuminated the stark terror on Ingrid's face. "Instead, you just showed me exactly who my enemies are," Stefano continued. "You thought you could whisper poison into my ear, and I would agree. But I do not negotiate with vermin, and I do not let the people who hurt my queen walk away." Stefano did not shoot her. He did not need to. He motioned to Matteo, who had just entered the room with 2 large men. "Take Lorenzo to the warehouse on the river," Stefano ordered. "And take her with him. Lock them in the central vault. And then burn the building to the ground. Let them see what it feels like to have everything they thought they controlled turn to ash." Ingrid began to scream, a ragged, tearing sound, as Matteo's men dragged her kicking and thrashing out of the control room. Lorenzo was hauled away by his collar, leaving a thick trail of blood on the pristine floor. Within minutes, the building was silent again. The surviving Falcone soldiers had surrendered or fled once they realized their boss was gone and their bank accounts were empty. The war was over before the city even woke up to realize it had started. Stefano turned back to me. He holstered his weapon and walked over, wrapping his arms around my waist and pulling me tight against his chest. I buried my face in his neck, breathing in the scent of smoke, blood, and the expensive cologne that was uniquely him. The adrenaline was finally leaving my system, leaving me trembling slightly. "It is over," Stefano whispered into my hair, pressing his lips to my temple. "You did it, Noemi. You dismantled an entire syndicate with a keyboard." "We did it," I corrected him, looking up into his eyes. He cupped my face in his large, warm hands. My thumbs traced the sharp line of his jaw. He leaned down, capturing my lips in a slow, searing kiss that spoke of promises and permanence. There was no hesitation, no holding back. He devoured me, and for the first time in my life, I did not want to hide a single part of myself. When we finally broke apart, Stefano looked deeply into my eyes, his thumb gently stroking my lower lip. "Tomorrow, the remaining families will pledge their absolute loyalty to the Esposito Syndicate. They will know that Chicago belongs to me. But more importantly, they will know that I belong to you." I smiled, feeling the heavy, beautiful weight of my own power. "I am a forensic accountant, Stefano. I am used to balancing the books." He laughed, a rich, dark sound that echoed in the quiet server room. "Then you know that my debt to you is infinite, Maya Regina. and I plan on spending the rest of my life paying it back. I walked out of the West Loop data center, holding the hand of the most dangerous man in the city. The cold Chicago wind whipped around us, but I had never felt warmer. Far off in the distance, near the industrial district by the river, a bright orange glow began to paint the night sky. The Falcone warehouse was burning. Ingrid had thought she could destroy me with a whispered insult. She had thought she could make me feel small. But she had only awakened the monster who was destined to crown me. She whispered to the Mafia Boss, not knowing he would burn them all to keep me warm. And as I watched the flames rise into the dark sky, leaning against the hard, protective warmth of Stefano's body, I knew I would never shrink myself for anyone ever again. I was Noemi Russo. I was the architect of the underworld, and I was exactly the right size to rule it. If you loved this gritty, dark mafia romance and want to see more stories full of high-stakes tension, brutal revenge, and unapologetic queens taking over the underworld, make sure to hit that like button. Share this video with a friend who loves a good revenge story. Drop a comment below telling us your favorite moment, and do not forget to subscribe to the channel for more gripping tales.